Welcome. My name is Dr. Ken Giles. I teach in the Art and Design program within the international programs. I'm here to sort of talk to you about an interesting aspect of art and design, and we're going to look at one sort of specific art form because it's sort of prevalent to our everyday experiences. In this talk, we're going to sort of look at how the photograph has evolved into this sort of cultural paradigm about the sort of intersections of how we use it on an everyday experience, but also in that sort of larger construct of art and design. So you can see in this next slide that this capacity for the photograph can be a site, can be a location, a place, a spot, a position. It also can be sight. It can be a picture. It can be a vista. It can be a scene. It can be a display. It can be a personal view. It also can be a form of citation or cite. It can be a quote. We can refer to it. We can name it. We can allude to it. We can mention other people in it. So the photograph and photography has become part and parcel of our everyday lives. But it had to start somewhere else. And in this quote from a very famous individual in the 1860s, Oliver Wendell Holmes, his quote sort of references, foreshadows our current experience with the photograph as an artistic form. As you read through it, you can start to see that he was foreshadowing this experience that we have with the photograph, and that everything that comes with this photographic object, this optical impression, is something that we're sort of living with in our daily lives at this context. So this imagery that we use is part and parcel of my own creative practice as a photographer, as an art practitioner, as an art instructor in that context. So the slides that you're going to sort of look at coming up are all my personal experimentations with this optical image. This first slide is a set of glass negatives that were scanned by a corrupted scanner, and hence we have this sort of interesting pixelation of how the photograph is being sort of degraded. But we have a historical moment being sort of retranscribed through this sort of optical digital scanning technology in this context. So what happens is that we start to sort of engage with both the historical nature of the photograph, because if we think about the photograph is always an historical moment. Every time we click a button on our cell phones, that image is an historical record. So we can bring this historical record back to life for us on our screens, in our sort of digital technology. But in traditional photographic imagery, we would have used a photographic print in that context. But with optical digital technology, we can now play around with photography in order to sort of look at how the time references of the photograph can be played around with. And so what's interesting is that in this image, what you're looking at is a series of 30 individual still frames taken from video technology and compressed and combined into a composite image. And what it sort of starts to describe is how we sort of engage with sort of temporality in the photograph, how we can sort of descend through that sort of photographic optical experience and see time unfolding in itself. So it's an interesting way in which digital technologies and photographic technologies start to sort of come together and play with our sense of time, place, location, and sight and vistas and views, as I mentioned earlier. In this next slide, we go back to the sort of traditional basis of what the photograph could play around with, and that is a sense of place. Where am I? What am I looking at? Where have I been? So it's in a historical trace of our moments in time. And so this was a photograph body of work that I sort of played around with in terms of the longitude and latitude, the GPS nature of the photographic image. So what's interesting is that we start to sort of see how, as an art form, we can use the traditional contexts of the photograph, locating us in a specific place at a specific time, a specific sort of spatial configuration, but also how we can start to sort of see ourselves in relationship to that context. What's interesting is that the photograph, and we tend to sort of forget this, is that the photograph is based on an optical presence, which is the photographer or the person taking the picture. So there always is a thinking mind behind the photograph. And for the audiences, sometimes it's very challenging to sort of play around with this idea that you're looking through the eyes of another person. And so this was something that I wanted to sort of play around with in this project. But what's also interesting is that with GPS technology, sometimes you don't even have to leave your home to experience a sort of spatial configuration. This was a project that I was commissioned to do in 2018 about navigating the city without leaving your home. So how did I do that? I had to go onto Google Maps, take a screenshot, and start to explore Windsor, Ontario from an aerial view. So it's interesting that we have this sort of relationship between photography and the photographic moment, but also with the ability to play around with our own spatial movements, use new technologies, use new GPS coordinates to find different sort of situations and locations in our context. But what's interesting historically, when photography was being sort of discussed about whether or not it was an art form or whether or not it was just a digital technological device, a lot of photographers were sent out into the world to give us visual representations of this world. And so this commission that was done in 2018 was part and parcel of that experience. To be sent out, but not really leave your home, sent out and sort of explore the city in that context. And this is an aerial view of Windsor, Ontario. And in the collection, there's about 6 or 8 very large images that provided you with an ability to sort of explore the city without even having to sort of leave your own home. What this sort of brings us to is how the optical photographic image can now be even further progressed into our sort of thinking and experiences. And as an art form, it now offers us great flexibility in order to sort of play around with the photographic image. And certainly applications allow us to sort of compress, stretch, cut, crop these images. And so what I've done is I've sort of created a sort of little animation to sort of explore this idea of how the photo-optic image, the photographic image, can be played around in a very sort of convenient and interesting and artistic way to sort of get you to sort of think about how vast and how important the photographic image is. So you can see here in this sort of still image before the animation begins, it's a composite of 500 photographs taken off a series of screenshots from my computer, and then compressed, overlaid, saturated in that sense. And then with other sort of editing technologies, we can create these sort of very interesting experiences of how the photographic image, the selfie, provides us with the sense of always giving us a sort of location, a grounding to our sort of experiences. So in this animation, you can start to sort of see how very simply we can take these sort of photographic images and create these sort of very elaborate scenarios. And what it gets us to sort of think about is how much we rely on the photographic image in this context. And so the final sort of quote that I want to sort of leave you with is basically, as it says on the screen, the photograph gives us the artistry to hold our past. Its reality of every act we looked upon is an endless cycle of the past, screened as a present memory. In that sort of sentiment, there is a sense that what we continually do in our everyday experiences is basically an artistic form. and how we then contextualize it provides us with a sort of interesting sort of understanding of how art and design can be used in a very sort of unique and fascinating way. And so thank you very much, and I hope to all see you in the art and design program within the Foundation and international programs next year. Thank you.